2 hours ago, Kyle arrived at the bar.
Hey, what's everyone drinking?
30 minutes ago, Kyle got his friends another round of drinks.
Cheers!
5 minutes ago, Kyle decided to drive home drunk. A minute ago, a law enforcement officer pulled up behind Kyle.
Sir, have you been drinking tonight?
A chain of events that began 2 hours ago is about to change Kyle's whole world. Drive sober or get pulled over. Paid for by NHTSA.
If you're the purchasing manager at a manufacturing plant, you know having a trusted partner makes all the difference. That's why, hands down, you count on Grainger for auto reordering. With on-time restocks, your team will have the cut-resistant gloves they need at the start of their shift. And you can end your day knowing they've got safety well in hand. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Happy holidays. Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy Holiday.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. So I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. I spoke when last we were together on Friday about foreign policy, and I suggested that foreign policy was front and center. I do so again today. There are three great trouble spots in the world which are in the headlines. There are many other trouble spots, but three that are in the headlines, and I want to address each one of them. First, the conversations between Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and the president of the United States. Let's be clear. Who is absent in terms of direct discussion? The one man who matters, Vladimir Putin. Now, it's true there are discussions going on. Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have been engaged in conversations with the Kremlin. But there is no doubt in my mind that this problem remains a tough nut to crack. Why? Have you noticed that Vladimir Putin has not given up on his efforts to subdue Ukraine? Even as these so-called peace talks are going on, Russia is stepping up its attacks. And when you are in the midst of negotiation and you begin the continuation of even more attacks, I think it raises questions. Now look, the Donbass region of Ukraine is central, as is the nuclear power plant, which exists and which is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Can there be a real concession by Ukraine? Now, Zelensky said something which really intrigues me. He says there needs to be a plebiscite. He may endorse an idea, but in the end, according to the Ukrainian constitution, only the people can vote. And what is Vladimir Putin's response to that? He doesn't like it, because he knows that the Ukrainian people will not vote for a compromise which gives Russia the appearance or the reality of a victory. And so we hit a stalemate. Now, Donald Trump said very clearly yesterday, they can either reach a peace or this is going to go on for years and years and years. The simple truth, at least in my mind, is this is going to go on for years and years and years. That is, as long as Russia continues its aggression. Remember that it was Donald Trump who suggested that the fault for all of this lay completely with Ukraine, because Trump said Ukraine began the war. Well, you and I know that isn't true. We know that this war was begun by Russia, by Vladimir Putin, because he wants to reclaim Ukraine. I understand the strategic interest that Ukraine has. Every Russian government has felt the same way, whether ruled by Tsar or Commissar or Putin. There is a simple reality. Ukraine is the breadbasket and, frankly, a great buffer for Russia against aggression from the West. So we've got a problem. And we will see in the next few days how this plays out. But unless there are three parties sitting down and talking, Russia, Ukraine, and yes, the West, that includes the United States and Europe, nothing happens. And then came the suggestion that the real answer would be security guarantees which could last for decades. Let me suggest to you that the odds of America committing itself for a long period of time, I don't think so. First of all, every administration wants the ability to maneuver. But also, there is the simple reality that there was the Budapest Agreement in 1995, which offered security guarantees to Ukraine against Russian aggression. And in return, what did Ukraine give up? The third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Now, 1995 to 2025, well, think about it. That was a decades-long process, but it didn't work. So the fundamental question which I pose today is what can be done short of Putin withdrawing from the part of Ukraine that he has conquered? And if the Ukrainians vote, do you think they'll vote to give areas of their country to Russia? And if there is a referendum, and that referendum fails to achieve the goal that Vladimir Putin wants, do you think he'll accept it? And remember that even while talks are going on, Putin continues his aggression. If you've been following the news from Kiev, you know that the missiles, the drones continue to land, and the issue becomes more intense with each passing day. I think it is also important to remember that Ukraine is now facing winter. And those of us who are familiar with history, whether it was Napoleon or Hitler, who dealt with the Russian winter, we must understand that this is a critical moment. Now, Donald Trump suggested before he took office that he'd be able to solve this whole problem within 24 hours. That clearly is not the case. January 20th will mark 1 year since Donald Trump took office, and the conflict and the violence and the attacks continue. I am pointing this out because this is a real problem. It doesn't just affect Ukraine and Russia. It affects Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Eastern Europe. And yes, it affects Western Europe, our allies, who Donald Trump has been dissing of late. Remember saying that he does not really have much faith in our European allies. Do you understand? Do we understand that this represents a severe problem? And so I am going to watch in the next few days to see how Vladimir Putin responds to all of this. So far, no indication of flexibility. And despite Donald Trump trying to paint a rosy picture, there seems to me to be no indication of a loosening by Putin of his demand for conquest of Ukraine. All right, we're going to put Ukraine aside for a moment and talk about another meeting dealing with foreign policy. And that has to do with the fact that Donald Trump will meet with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, today. Now, let's be clear. Part of the deal, so-called, that Donald Trump put together worked, and that is the release of all the hostages except one. We know there are questions about one hostage, and we wait for that anxiously. But we also know that the demand for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza was contingent upon Hamas giving up its weapons and more. But let's be clear, Hamas is not prepared to give up its weapons. And let's be even clearer. Those who suggest there is an alternative Palestinian force to Hamas have yet to come up with what that force might be. What I do know is that the Israelis will not go back to a situation in which Hamas rules Gaza. I do know that the demand for demilitarization of Hamas stands as a key element to the so-called Trump 20 or 21-point plan. I do know that the Israelis are very concerned about their security. Let's remember that what caused all of this, at least in recent years, was the Hamas attack on southern Israel. And Hamas has given no indication of its willingness to step back from its position that Israel has no right to exist. The war brought about several key elements, including the destruction of many of those who oppose Israel's right to exist. Except we know that even that is not completely true, because Hezbollah in Lebanon is back, and Islamic Jihad has never surrendered, and Hamas still controls portions of Gaza. There is no peace at this point in the Middle East, and the Israelis are not going to give in to what they consider to be an open door to more aggression. This is the simple reality. And so when Donald Trump speaks about peace in the Middle East, let me be clear. What was accomplished was the release of all the living hostages, and for that, everyone is grateful. That was a triumph for Donald Trump, and yes, the Israelis, because they hung tough on this as well. But now comes the real problem. How do you create a Gaza which is demilitarized, no threat to Israel? And how can the support that the Palestinians clearly need, how can it be achieved without compromising security? Will the Palestinians come along? That's the question. And now, the third major foreign policy issue, and that is Taiwan. Are you watching what is happening in Taiwan? China has surrounded the island. They are using live ammunition. They are clearly preparing for some action which could include their goal of seizing Taiwan. The question becomes, what will the Western response, what will the American response be if Taiwan were really invaded? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know what we are willing to risk in relation to China. Remember that much of what the West is now doing with China is negotiating on everything from tariffs to security to the question of, well, Taiwan. But the Chinese have an inflexible approach. They believe that Taiwan, Formosa, is part of China, and they, at this point, are not willing to concede anything else. And so we see Taiwan surrounded. We see live ammunition being used. We see China doing everything short of an invasion, but clearly preparing for such an action. Richard Nixon once said to me that 60%, 70% of a president's time is consumed with foreign policy. Make no mistake, we have other issues. We have the Epstein files. We have the question of healthcare in this country. Remember, the end of the year is this week, and what happens then when all of the payments are going to skyrocket for health insurance? We have the question of our national debt, which continues to grow. We have a Veterans Administration which just announced that they are not going to provide abortion services, period. And this, to me, well, these are just examples. And we have Donald Trump still thundering that there needs to be an examination of election fraud, meaning 2020. It is Donald Trump's contention that that's more important than the Epstein files, more important than anything domestically. And he called on Congress, get to it, investigate the question of the election. Well, we know who won the election of 2020, and yes, we know who lost the election. But Donald Trump's efforts to subvert American democracy continue. I want to conclude these observations by saying there is much which should be discussed, much which needs to be illuminated in terms of the American people's understanding of what's going on both sides. I told you that I participated in a radio talk show for a station in the South Bay. And the question posed to me was, is there such a thing as Trump derangement syndrome? And the person who was in charge of the show clearly believed that there is. And he asked me, what do you think, John? And I said, yes, there is Trump derangement syndrome on both sides, from those who hate Trump and those who love Trump. It is not a rational response, but our analysis of the real issues needs to be rational and clear and precise. And that is what we intend to do right here at Around the Political World with John Rothman as we approach a new year. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links to the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. We look forward to the year ahead, and as you know, this show has been getting so much positive attention that we now have advertising support and more coming. This will help us to create more opportunities for Around the Political World, and we're happy to share that good news with you. We are approaching a new year, and with a new year comes new hope. And despite what appears to be a very tough problem, I got to tell you something. Whether it is in Ukraine, or whether it is in the Middle East, or whether it is in China, or whether it is our own domestic concerns, I remain hopeful. And I hope you do too. I want to say a special thank you to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast. Gogo, thanks so much for everything you do. And, I'll be back tomorrow. We have a few more days of 2025, and who knows what might happen. But we'll be right here talking about it with you on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you tomorrow.
Happy holidays! Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy Holiday. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.